Good afternoon, and welcome to the Center for Disaster Philanthropy webinar, Hurricane Irma, What Funders Should Know. This is Regine, Webster, Vice President of the Center for Disaster Philanthropy. To provide some insight on the actual on-the-ground situation in Florida and the Caribbean, as well as on effective disaster giving, we have 5 esteemed colleagues on the line today to offer their perspective and wisdom. I'm going to forgo the long bios today in favor of giving them each a little bit more time to talk about their expertise and their viewpoint. We have Liz Gibson. She's the Individual Assistance and Voluntary Agency Liaison Section Chief at FEMA. Cathy Howard is the Section Chief of CAPALAC, which is Central Asia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Latin America, and the Caribbean and Ukraine, who is the Coordination and Response Division of OCHA, which is the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Assistance at the UN. Sherry Magill is the President of the Jessie duPont Fund. Rebecca Mandelman is Vice President for Strategy and Engagement at the Miami Foundation. And Bob McFalls is the President and CEO of the Florida Philanthropic Network. We're also joined by Brian Del Rosario, who's in the wings, as you say, if legal questions arise. He is one of our colleagues from the Council on Foundations and would be available to take your questions. So welcome to our panelists, and thank you so much for taking time to speak with us today. We're going to divide up our time this hour into 3 distinct chapters to help keep us focused. Chapter 1, we'll hear from Liz and Cathy to learn more about the needs on the ground that OCHA and FEMA are working to meet and to get their perspectives on how this early relief phase is going. Chapter 2, we'll turn our attention to Bob, Sherry, and Rebecca to hear the on-the-ground view from 3 distinguished funders in Irma-affected Florida. And then lastly, Chapter 3, we'll spend the final part of our time together fielding your questions that you send through the Q&A function of the Zoom webinar. And honestly, if you wiggle your cursor underneath the Zoom screen, a little box that says Q&A will pop up, and you can plug your questions right in there for us to field. This webinar would not have been possible at all without the co-sponsorship support we received from the Council on Foundations and the Southeastern Council on Foundations. We have terrific colleagues filled with expertise and an enormous amount of compassion at both the Council and the Southeastern Council. All right, let's turn right now into Chapter 1. We're going to turn to Liz and to Cathy for just a brief overview of the situation on the ground, both in the United States and its territories, as well as internationally. Liz, why don't I go ahead and invite you to start your remarks, please.
I'm happy to do that. Good afternoon, everyone. The current situation for Hurricane Irma, I'm going to speak primarily to Florida initially, and then I'll get into the Caribbean just a little bit. Right now, we're really happy about the fact that the rivers will be cresting today and finishing. That puts us over the hump, so to speak. In terms of the flooding activity, we'll be able to better gauge what the final results of all the flooding will be after today. We still have quite a number of people in shelters. There are 10,000 people, a little more than 10,000 people in shelters due to Hurricane Irma. Now, not all of those folks are in Florida. A few of them are in Georgia. Some of them are in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Tennessee, who just exited due to the storm, but are beginning to make their way back, depending on where they live in the state. We did experience 29 fatalities, so that's tragic. It's just, yeah. The schools are beginning to open. So that's encouraging. Many of the schools across this state. Our current focus is on consolidating the shelters. We have a program called TSA, or Temporary Shelter Assistance. We work hard to move many of our folks out of shelters and into a hotel situation, and provide some wraparound services then while they're in the hotel in terms of sheltering, in terms of feeding, and that sort of things, and meeting with them to try to figure out how we can get them back home as soon as possible. We're focused on the elderly issues quite a bit there too, looking at the special needs kinds of things in the assisted living, temporary housing, all of those sorts of issues around the elderly. Feeding and bulk distribution are probably the 2 key things that we're working on getting as many things distributed as we can. There's still many roads that are not passable So we have to kind of work around that. We're working very closely with Department of Transportation. So then I want to move over and talk a little bit about Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Puerto Rico is recovering or moving into recovery a little faster than the USVI. They did not have quite as much damage. It was primarily focused in the two outer islands, Vieques and Culebra, and there are still some folks sheltered within the two islands there, about 180 folks. We have a number of folks still in shelters over in the U.S. Virgin Islands. The U.S. Virgin Islands, we were just able to get staff on the islands yesterday. We've had a great deal of trouble getting folks transported. There was so much debris on the air strip that we weren't able to, the air traffic was very limited, and the harbor had quite a bit of debris in it. We weren't able to get in and out of the harbor, so small boats were really the only way in and out. We have got much of the debris cleared, and so most of the military and supported air freight is going in now. So we've been able to move food and water and fuel into the island. Our team of voluntary agency liaisons arrived there yesterday, and they're meeting today with other voluntary agencies and the VOET in the communities out there, traveling around. They're island hopping from the 3 different islands to meet with folks. So there is still a lot of power outage in both islands. In Puerto Rico, there's only about 16% of the folks still are without power, so that very encouraging that we've been able to get much of the power back on quickly there. However, U.S. Virgin Islands, a great deal of the island has absolutely limited power. So that's again been one of our challenges in getting folks over there, trying to get folks into temporary shelter, et cetera, because there just isn't any place to do that. We are working on getting tents and other alternate shelters over to U.S. Virgin Islands, simply because we can't move mobile homes and those kinds of alternate housing over there. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cathy and let her go forward with her report.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Liz. Just checking that the sound quality is still good. It was very clear with Liz.
You sound great.
Excellent, super, great. Okay, so I'd just like to sort of walk us through very briefly the situation in the Caribbean, and then look at the kinds of response ongoing. I think everyone, of course, will have been following the news very closely, so I'm not going to go into great detail, sort of island by island. Clearly, Hurricane Irma has caused, has had a significant impact on 11 islands in the region, and has impacted some 1.2 million people so far. Now, just to note actually that Hurricane Irma has been the most fierce hurricane to date, but we know that this hurricane season has been forecasted as probably going to be the most ferocious hurricane season on record. So I think we just need to also bear in mind looking forward that, the next 6 to 8 weeks is still the hurricane season. So there may be more, we hope not, but more of these situations and hurricanes coming down the track. Now, we've seen, of course, the Irma impact on a number of islands. The most hard hits, of course, has been Antigua and Barbuda. And Barbuda, we're looking at, almost 100% of all structures and so on damaged or destroyed, leaving that island virtually uninhabitable. And the population, small as it is, has been evacuated from there. But of course, we have St. Barthélemy, St. Martin, Saint Martin, the British Virgin Islands, Anguilla, Turks and Caicos, the US Virgin Islands, all impacted, and Cuba. And I'll come on to Cuba particularly in a moment. So it has had a major impact on particularly home structures, infrastructure, agricultural lands as well. So I think we have both, of course, the issue of immediate needs that need to be met, but also this is going to have a longer term impact on agriculture in these islands, and we have still quite a number of people who have been displaced. And we do estimate that maybe in the region of some 15,000 people are still at the moment in need of some form of emergency shelter assistance. Now, the number of people killed on the islands by Hurricane Irma, I mean, is around about 25. That number may change. It's not, obviously a personal, an individual tragedy for those people and their families, but these are not large numbers when you look at sort of how these hurricanes can impact. And I think a lot of the reason for a relatively minor loss of life has been also the role of and the value of the early preparedness actions and the early warning system in place. And I think that's a tribute also to the national disaster authorities as well, in also in some cases preemptively evacuating people from the hurricane's path. I mentioned Cuba as being a particular cause of concern because while Hurricane Irma spared Haiti and the Dominican Republic this time round, and I think we were all very much sort of, holding our breath to see whether Haiti would be impacted. It has pummeled Cuba, and it really is the most significant hurricane to have made landfall with Cuba since 1924. And it has caused massive destruction, widespread flooding along the northern coast, but also in the interior regions as well. Currently, we estimate that some 3 million people in Cuba are without access to potable water. While that service will be being restored in due course, of course, that will also depend on the rehabilitation of the electric power system. There's been quite significant damage to the housing sector. There's also some 10,000 hectares of agricultural land that has also been damaged. And also a significant number of schools, for instance. So Irma has had a huge impact on Cuba. I think the interesting thing in terms of looking at the response, though, in the region is we do have a situation here where the majority of the islands impacted are overseas territories, and of course have the links with the governments of the US, France, Netherlands, and the United Kingdom. And from the United Nations perspective, of course, we have been an OCHA in its role in coordinating humanitarian assistance across the spectrum of UN agencies, NGOs, in collaboration with government. Also very much has taken its lead, respectful of the role of governments of the UK, the US, the Netherlands, and France, who are in the lead of the response. It is a somewhat unusual situation. We have provided technical support through what are called UNDAC teams. These are United Nations Disaster Assessment Coordination teams. And we've had a number of these teams sent out, and they have also been assisting on, for instance, Barbuda and Turks and Caicos and the British Virgin Islands. The UN concern, of course, is particularly though in support of those countries' sovereign island nations, in this case Antigua and Barbuda, and also, of course, Cuba. Cuba, of course, will inevitably not ask for international assistance, but there will be other mechanisms that can kick into action through the United Nations that would support Cuba. What we have seen is a very well established regional emergency response mechanism, which has quickly sprung into action, both in terms of, I mentioned, some of the preparedness measures already taken place, and then since then. And we do work through also the agency, the organization of SEDIMA, which is the coordination for disaster management assistance in the region of CARICOM countries, to ensure really that the support is there towards governments as well. Now, just very, very concretely, while, as I say, the impact of Irma could have been much worse, there are certainly humanitarian needs that need to be responded to. One of OCHA's roles is actually putting together a regional response plan, which is in its final stages of preparation, and we hope to go live with it tomorrow. And this will be a 3-month regional response plan to address some of the most pressing, time-critical humanitarian needs. And again, the focus will be those on islands such as Barbuda and elsewhere, but also elsewhere. So watch that space, because we hope to launch that tomorrow. Also, one of the roles that we have as OCHA is also in support of the wider UN support and the mobilization of international attention and support to the Caribbean at this time of crisis. And to that end, you may be aware we have the General Assembly, which is now kick-started here in New York. And on Monday, there will be a high-level event on Hurricane Irma, chaired by the Secretary General. At that event, of course, impacted member states will be present and speaking, as the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Assistance, Mark Lowcock, the United Nations Development Program Administrator, and also a speaker from the World Bank will be there, also to show how the UN system can come together, bridging both the humanitarian development and recovery and reconstruction needs of the area. So those are, I'll probably stop there. I hope that gives a little bit of a sense of the impact and the response ongoing. I think just to sort of to close with the fact that the words that while the as I say, the humanitarian impact will be relatively short-lived, the key needs of the islands will be in terms of recovery and reconstruction. So we are, hoping, of course, for a more sustained response in due course from development actors and donors. I'll stop there. Over.
Cathy, this is so incredibly helpful, and so helpful of you to give the breakdown of the numbers of individuals affected, as well as their geographic locations. It just helps paint the picture so nicely. Question for the two of you. How would you characterize the governmental and non-governmental response thus far, both domestically as well as in the Caribbean?
Hi, this is Liz. I would say that FEMA is doing what FEMA does. Having been with the agency for more than 20 years now, I can tell you that our response to this event and to Harvey just prior to this, if I had to compare them to the last couple of really large events, Hurricane Sandy and prior to that Hurricane Katrina, I would have to tell you that we're 100% better than what we were able to do there. Between the lessons learned from those two events, changes in our the Stafford Act, which governs what we do and how we do it, which is congressional support for us, has been tremendous. We have new leadership here, which has been very refreshing and energizing for us. And so we're doing, I believe, an excellent job, that as good a job as we could do. Could we improve? Always. The challenges are staffing, trying to be equitable about the skills sets that we move from place to place. As with every agency, or I think every organization, you have limits in terms of the number of people that you have, and so we work to be equitable about putting our skills where they need to be able to maximize our assistance to survivors. So we're still working on that in the Florida, Puerto Rico, and Virgin Islands situation, just because of the flooding, because of the lack of communication, the challenges that we face with transportation, those kinds of things. But help is getting there, slower than we like, but getting there. So I would say we're better. Are we perfect? No, but we strive for that.
Great, thanks, Liz. Cathy, how about you?
Lovely. Yes, I would probably sort of second sort of Liz's words. I think what we're seeing, of course, that this has an impact over quite a large sort of territory, a number of islands, which does present a lot of logistical challenges. This with airports being closed, infrastructure damaged. So it is going to require quite a significance of logistics resources. But we're seeing indeed sort of national government stepping up with that. I think the response, if I could use the example of Haiti, actually, which was not so badly impacted, but I think it is interesting in that, of course, Haiti was massively impacted by Hurricane Matthew last year in October. And I think there have been a lot of lessons learned from that experience, whereby the preparedness measures that Haiti took this time round really, proved to be very effective. Now, it wasn't tested so much in the end, as luckily sort of Irma did not impact Haiti so much. But we would certainly like to think that had that been truly tested, that we would have seen really the benefits of the early warning system kicking into action and the preparedness measures to date. I think the response is picking up. We know, of course, we're all very aware of when you are yourself and your community and families are impacted, the response is never quick enough. And there will be, of course, concerns and about the speed of the response. But also we are looking at very often, I think, very quite so resilient communities as well, who are very, very keen on picking up the pieces very quickly. And I think what's key now is that the international community is mobilized to provide the resources short-term and longer-term for these communities so that they can really build back better and come out of this stronger. I'll stop there.
I have one last quick question to pose to you both before we turn to chapter 2, and that's about whether or not either of you have any public health concerns about the aftermath of Hurricane Irma. I mean, both of you mentioned waters cresting and 3 million people without potable water. So I'm just curious if public health concerns are on your mind.
Absolutely. This is Liz. Absolutely, yes. We're working very, very closely with HHS and the public health folks to get vaccine. One of our wins, as we call them, when we successfully, we struggle with something and then we finally accomplish it. One of our wins was getting vaccines over to Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands yesterday. So we got quite a large lot of vaccines available. They'll be able to start dispensing those. So yes, we're constantly thinking about that, constantly thinking about the babies, children, and their nutritional needs, which keeps them healthy, constantly trying to work on elderly issues, and again, feeding needs, making sure that we've got, that the food that we feed is keeping people healthy. But yeah, we worry about the water situation, trying to get clean water and potable water to places, again, to decrease the level of exposure that people have to disease. So it's a constant struggle, but we're focused on it, and we have strong partners working with us on that.
Great.
Thanks, Liz. How about you, Cathy?
Right. I think Liz has covered all bases in terms of sort of public health issues. I just though like to sort of come back on though in terms of sort of where how the response needs to be supported. This Hurricane Irma is taking place against a backdrop, of course, of massive humanitarian needs elsewhere in the world. But there are needs that will need to be addressed as short and longer term. And I think one of I would just like to stress that it's really important that we get donors, civil society, private business to support the mechanisms in place So I've already outlined a couple of those possibilities, such as support to the to be released humanitarian regional response plan. There are also mechanisms by which private, business could also can support directly organizations and agencies. We do very much sort of advocate for money, for funding to be given, rather than, for instance, in-kind donations. It just allows for a lot more flexibility and greater impact. So just to put in that plug, though, for that there are funding needs.
We couldn't agree with you more. Cash is king, Cathy. All right, let's turn now to Chapter 2. Reminder, we've got in front of us 3 philanthropic experts. We've got Bob, Rebecca, and Sherry. And while you're hearing them answer their initial first round of questions, let me remind all of our audience participants to please go to the Q&A chat, little Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will be fielding your questions when we get to Chapter 3. So let me start. I'm going to pose this question to all 3, Sherry, Rebecca, and Bob. But I would love to hear from you all. How are you? How are your staff? How's your organization in this crazy week that will likely for all of us be remembered by Hurricane Irma? Sherry, do you want to start?
Sure. This is Sherry. Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to participate and learn along with everybody else. Just in terms of my own staff, we're a small group of 10. 3 people on the staff had very serious issues, the worst being one person whose house had 2 trees fall on it. Fortunately, no one was hurt, but he was immediately rendered homeless. So he is making his own application to FEMA, which is helping us understand the process for folks. Some of us don't have power. I, for example, don't have power, and there's no estimate on when I will have power. So it's, storms are indiscriminate in terms of people's station in life and wealth, et cetera, et cetera. I think one of the things we're learning is the wealthy live along the river and the poor live along the creeks, and both have been dramatically affected. I think you heard earlier someone said it's getting warm. It's getting hot in Jacksonville again. I think we're bracing for a weekend of rain. So we still have flooding, even though the river's receding, the creeks are receding, and it's those hard to reach folks that I think we're deeply concerned about. So that's just on us, and I'll end there and wait for the next question.
Bob, how about you?
Well, as Sherry said, thank you for giving the Florida Philanthropic Network the opportunity to participate as well. We are a network of grant makers, and it's a pleasure and privilege to be on with Sherry and with Rebecca, both of whom are founding members of our network, and in terms of our history. We were fortunate that our office did not suffer any damage. We did our preparations prior to closing up the office. Currently, we have staff both at our headquarters in Tampa and also in South Florida. Half of our staff are without power still. So it's, we're kind of a divided house, but we're not alone. A lot of people in Florida still without power, and looking forward to its return. And I know just from personal messaging that, some folks are getting it, day by day. It's one of those things we all take for granted until it's gone, and then we really do seriously miss it. I know on a personal level, this is my 8th natural disaster to have worked, having worked and lived in Palm Beach County in 2004 and 2005 and responding there, as well as other disaster events in Kentucky and in Tennessee. It's very uncomfortable when you are without power for up to 3 to 4 weeks. So hopefully we'll see power restored much faster than that for the majority of Floridians.
I agree with you on that one. Rebecca, you have to tell everybody where you are, as well as telling us how your staff and your organization are doing.
Sure thing. Thanks, Regine. Thank you to everyone for having us on. It is a privilege to be on here with my colleagues from throughout Florida and throughout the country. So I am currently in New York City. I evacuated up here. I have a small baby and we came on up here. It actually took us 27 hours to get from Miami to New York City via airplane. So it was a pretty harrowing journey, and now all of our flights have been canceled repeatedly from here. But of course, this is really not a big deal in comparison to what most are going through. Our staff, like you've just heard from Bob and from Sherry, we've got lots of people without power still. Some folks had some minor flooding to their homes, but across the board, we've been very, very fortunate. You know, folks are inconvenienced and uncomfortable, but in comparison to sort of what the predictions were for Miami-Dade County, and in comparison to what many of our neighbors throughout Florida and in the Caribbean are going through, you know, it's certainly not amongst the worst. I do think we also, though, are experiencing a bit of just, you know, the exhaustion of what happened before Irma even occurred. The sort of mass evacuation from Florida is a story that I'm sure many folks on the line either experienced directly or read about. You know, really what to do, how to get out when a storm as large as the entire state is coming at us was really harrowing. And now the aftermath, you know, vulnerable populations and communities without power, without food, without water. You know, we're just very focused on how we can support our service providers and folks who are the first responders, really responding to our community as well as to our neighbors, you know, immediately to the south of us in the Florida Keys.
Thanks for that, Rebecca. And we do all, I really hope that you and your baby get home safe and sound very soon.
Thank you.
I want to turn a question over to Bob. You know, I've heard from some of my friends and colleagues that you have specific expertise in meeting the needs of older adults following a disaster. And, you know, certainly it's our FEMA colleagues have been telling us to be aware of the needs of older adults. The Washington Post wrote a really strong article. And then just yesterday, we heard of the devastating news about the death of many older adults. Can you give us a sense for how, you know, tell us how donors can meet the unique needs of older adults following a disaster?
Well, one of the things I would say as an applied gerontologist in terms of my background and having run the Area Agency on Aging of Palm Beach Treasure Coast from 2003 until 2009 and doing related work is that, to use a social service term, there is no wrong door. There's no wrong door for assistance. I think that most foundations have a disaster relief fund. We're really, you know, pleased that the Center for Disaster Philanthropy has one. The Council on Foundations has one. Most of our members have one at the community level in Florida. So I would just say to philanthropists that you know, make a donation someplace. Let's get the funds flowing. We know that following this work that's being done now in terms of response, that we're looking at short-term and long-term recovery, and those efforts will take not just months, but years to get back to where we were before. So I think that is, you know, really a critical consideration, you know, for individuals to consider. One of the things is that we have started conversations with a number of our members, and especially the community foundations of Florida. In Florida, all the community foundations are united as members of FPN. We're really pleased to have that engagement and support. And what we're already seeing is conversation taking place. We have conducted one telephone call with the Florida community foundations of Florida. And what they're going to do is to target money that they receive if they're in an area where that has not been as severely impacted to areas of greater need, and whether that is the Naples area or Rebecca, I know that there's need in Miami-Dade, and there's needs in the Caribbean and the Miami Foundation. has established a fund for that as well. Sherry, I know that there's a lot of need in Jacksonville with respect to flooding, as well as Central Florida was severely impacted too by the storm when Irma took that unexpected path and went back up through the middle of the state. So my advice is just to get involved and to find a fund. All of us have places for that opportunity to occur, and on our website we're listing all the funds in Florida whereby individuals can get involved and make a difference with a voluntary donation.
Bob, thank you so much. I'm going to push you gently a little bit because I know that many of our listeners, and me too, quite selfishly, want to hear your opinion on how to best support older adults. Can you give us a sense of that?
Well, one of the things that we did in Palm Beach County was we responded, and not just Palm Beach, but I should say Treasure Coast counties as well, especially in 2004, was that we coordinated individual assistance response. And so I think for now, I would say, participate by making a donation. And then what we will need to do is to see which nonprofits are really critically involved in those disaster response efforts. I know that a number of the foundations are doing community assessments with their nonprofit organizations to determine, what the capacity is to respond at this particular point in time. But I will say that the needs will be for several weeks now. What we found in terms of co-chairing ESF Emergency Service Function 11 in Palm Beach County, in terms of individual assistance, was that in times like this, when it is hot and people do not have power, it's really refreshing to get ice delivered to the door. It's really great to have nutritious food, and recognizing that the classic MREs, meals ready to eat, are not necessarily the healthiest choice. But I think that as we've heard earlier, that we've made a lot of improvements in assuring that older adults do have access to nutritious meals. And along with that is just the water, making sure that people have access to water, for hydration and just maintaining good health is critically important. What we found in doing our door-to-door deliveries, sometimes going up 20, 25 flights of stairs in a condo where someone had not evacuated, is that the older adult especially will welcome the fact that someone is checking in on him or her, and that they know that someone really cares and that they have not been forgotten. So I think that we're really looking at a very important mobilization effort. When you look at the fact in Florida that 1 out of 5 of us are over the age of 60, I'm sorry, 65. That's a pretty significant population that could need our help and our collective collaborative approach.
I'm so with you, and I know for sure that the Center for Disaster Philanthropy is going to be calling on your expertise on this area. Let me turn the mic over to Sherry. Gosh, you have navigated in your role at the fund, you've navigated the philanthropic response to the Tuscaloosa tornadoes, and then certainly most recently Hurricane Matthew. What would you view best practices for philanthropists working in these big disasters like Irma?
Well, I think if I could use one word, I would say coordinate, 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 get on one page, have one fund. So we worked very hard last year after Matthew to work closely with the Community Foundation of Northeast Florida and United Way of Northeast Florida to build one fund. We led that, meaning the duPont Fund made an outright grant and then a challenge grant. And we created a 3-organization grants committee. So staff from Community Foundation, the duPont Fund, and United Way worked together as the grants committee. We stood that back up last week. In fact, we stood it up before Irma got here. A league gift from the fund with a matching challenge. And then because of the magnitude of this, we have had no trouble meeting the challenge, and then additional major gifts. So if you haven't heard, the NFL is doing $1 million here. Blue Cross Blue Shield is doing $1 million statewide in Florida. 100,000 of which will come here. But the point is, I think those three major philanthropies, again, the Community Foundation, us, and United Way, have such a close working relationship to begin with. We easily agreed that it's one fund and it's a joint grants committee. And the purpose of that fund is to literally move money to nonprofit organizations that can serve individuals. So it's Red Cross, it's Salvation Army, it's Catholic Charities, and then a host of those smaller organizations that you don't know about nationally, but they're very localized. Yet you have them in your community too, you know, also food bank. But these are the shelter systems, the clothing, feeding systems. It's that early response emergency part of this. Then the other thing that we're doing that's not what I would say the fundraising and grant making side of it, but with all due respect to the conversation about state government and local government, I have to say on the ground it feels very, very different than that. Local government is a weak link in this for us. I think, oddly enough, on the philanthropic and nonprofit side, we may know more than they know about how you collaborate and coordinate and who's going to do what. So we're in the process of helping them with that tomorrow. Big meeting here in our building, and I think we're doing better at that than we have in the past. Every one of these is a run through. But just on the philanthropic side, again, coordinate one fund, come to agreement about how you do the grants, what's their purpose, because the donor community, as you all know really, really well, they want to know that. They want to know that. They want to know they're just not throwing their money into some deep hole. I think we finally have that right here. I think this is our second rodeo, and I think we're getting better at that piece. I'm very, very proud of it.
Thanks, Sherry. I appreciate your mandate. That really is so helpful for all of us. Rebecca, the Miami Foundation, you guys have also been very active in thinking both about the immediate needs as well as the long term. Can you give us a bit of an overview about what your organization has been doing?
Sure, absolutely, Regine. So we have three funds that were set up just before Hurricane Irma hit Florida. One, as Bob had mentioned before, is focused on philanthropic funds for our neighbors in the Caribbean. One of them is a partnership with several more grassroots community-based organizations that is providing both immediate relief and also short-term relief to vulnerable communities within Miami-Dade County. And then the final one is our General Hurricane Relief Fund, which will be deploying really in a manner of two ways. One will be in partnership with other institutions in Miami-Dade County, such as the ones that Sherry was just speaking about that are part of their partnership. So our local United Way, our Children's Trust, et cetera, that will be working in partnership with to understand really where the greatest needs are, as well as also to support some of those community-based grassroots organizations. And so these three funds are sourcing dollars from a variety of different donors. We're seeing a lot of donors from outside of the Miami area, just national donors, individuals who want to help. They saw what was happening and they really want to be a part of these relief efforts. Certainly the funds that we've set up for Caribbean relief is sourcing funds from the significant Caribbean diaspora population and community in Miami-Dade County, and that was actually set up in partnership with some leaders from the Caribbean diaspora community in Miami. So we're seeing donations come in from a lot of different places. The other aspect to what we're doing right now is how Sherry was speaking about how, the second time around they've gotten it right. We're really focused on kind of what's happening that can be done better the next time around. We were fortunate in many ways not to get a direct hit from Hurricane Irma as was anticipated. So we're very determined to understand what role we can play in helping to strengthen and make our community even more resilient. So when the next one comes around, we can be even better positioned to respond more quickly, more effectively, and really in a more united front. And that's both on the philanthropic side, but also on the nonprofit side, and also in how we're all working with our local municipal governments and county governments. And as well as in the communication side, we saw a lot of communication sort of breakdowns, both leading up to Irma, during Irma, and afterwards, from the obvious, which is folks losing power, so losing, any source of information they can get without, internet, since everything is hooked up through, digitally now. Our cable is, our, phones, our internet, our CD, our computers, etc. So, when folks lose access to that information in this digital age, when we are all so dependent on our devices for information versus sort of decades ago when people had landlines and battery-powered radios, how is communication disseminated, and also the accuracy of the communication. Just on a sort of local community level, we saw that things got, a bit out of hand at times with incorrect information, just, spurning the mass and confusing people, folks who just didn't have access to that information. And then, of course, going along sort of, a wealth divide, individuals who are just able to get on their feet far more quickly after a crisis like this because of access to information, resources, etc., versus those for whom it's a lot more difficult. So that's a bit about what we're doing.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. I really appreciate that. We're going to turn now to our audience questions. So far there's 8 of them. We'll do our best to get to a few for sure. Cathy and Liz, question to you that I think is one that will be familiar. There's been quite a bit reported about how much money was given for assistance for Haiti after the earthquake and then after Hurricane Matthew, and how little results can be documented. That much of the money never really got to the people and communities in real need. How do we ensure that funding, government and private, actually gets to those in need and not just lining the pockets of organizations claiming to provide assistance? That was an anonymous attendee who posed that question to Cathy and Liz.
Do you want any of us to respond? How do you want to do this?
Let's have Cathy and Liz first, and then if they want to pass the mic to you, Sherry, they should feel free to do that.
Oh no. Okay, great.
Yeah, super. No, thanks very much for that. That very interesting question. Indeed, what is absolutely so critical is ensuring accountability of the aid system at times of crisis, to ensure that those in need are getting the assistance they require. And of course, the funding, from whatever source it comes, we do need to be ensuring that that is well accounted for. I think looking at at a time of crisis, there's often many different initiatives, different sort of funding streams kicking into action. It can be very chaotic. It can be, it's a very fast-moving situation. I think what is important, though, is that to recognize that there are a significant number of very well-established, very reputable aid organizations, international non-governmental organizations and of course the United Nations. The particular INGOs, which are often the first, have a great reach and are often sort of the first responders, do also operate according to their own well-established rules and regulations. There are codes of conduct out there to try and ensure that NGOs do operate to the highest possible standards. We see particularly also, for instance, the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement in many of these areas are extremely experienced, and they are often the first responders. So I think it is important to try and while there will be some cases of misappropriation of aid and so on, the vast majority of support and funding, if channeled through well-established, reputable organizations, will get to people in need. And again, just a call on everyone to look out for the regional response plan when it comes out, because those are with partners that the UN is confident in working with. So if you want to support that, you can be confident that your money is going to be going to people and really have an impact. Over.
Thanks, Cathy. Sherry, I've got a question that's coming to you, but I'm going to ask you to do a one-paragraph answer just so that we can squeeze in a couple more questions. The question from Jennifer Bush is this: for foundations and donors who want to support disaster recovery from Irma and Harvey, what criteria do you suggest they consider in crafting their strategy?
For people who want to make grants, and
for
they
foundations and donors who want to support disaster recovery from Irma and Harvey.
Okay, so I don't know about Harvey because it was a Texas thing. For Irma in our part of Florida, I would say go to the United Way site, invest in our one fund. It's called the First Coast Relief Fund, and understand that the grants will be made by the DuPont Fund, United Way, and the Community Foundation with input from our nonprofit agencies to organizations that we trust, that we have worked with for years, that we go out and visit, and we will, with confidence say we know how this money is being spent. If you want to fund individual relief, the only way we're getting to individuals is through the First Coast Florida Relief Fund. So I hope that answers the question. I'm not sure that it does, but I hope that it does.
I think you're good. Bob, I'll turn this next question over to you again with the same kind of request for a one-paragraph response. Jeff Johnson has asked, I understand that in this initial phase of recovery, cash is key. Many people need small sums to pay immediate bills to get back on their feet. Is there a network of local agencies who manage these kind of small sum requests well that funders can work with? And Bob, I don't know the answer to this question, by the way, so if you don't either, feel free to ask Rebecca and Sherry.
Well, I think it really depends upon the community approach, but what I have seen, to Sherry's point, in other parts of the state, that there are collaboratives where funders are coming together to basically, work together and make funding available. My thought is that, to Jeff's question, is that the funders would need to work with the nonprofit then to make that individual assistance available. But my experience has been that most communities do have nonprofits that are ready, willing, and able to step into that assistance role.
That is really helpful. I'm going to read this question, came from Spencer Butler, and I'm going to let you all suggest who's the best person to answer. I work at a community foundation in North Carolina and have received a very specific question from one of our fund holders about the Virgin Islands. What would you recommend for giving funds to a nonprofit that is supporting them as they rebuild? Perhaps this is a Cathy question? Or a Liz question? Liz would like to answer. Liz, go to you.
Sure. I would say that if you would go to the website, nationalvoad.org, nvoad.org, you will see a list of trusted and well-vetted organizations that belong to the umbrella organization of National VOAD. They're individual, but any of those organizations will have donations page and will tell you if they're working in the Virgin Islands. I can tell you right off the top of my head, not endorsing anyone, but just let you know that Salvation Army is there, Red Cross is there, Southern Baptists are there, Mercy Flight is there, Mercy Angel Flight. So there are a number of agencies really working to provide services, but that website would give you a list of very trusted agencies to be able to forward those fundings, to be able to donate in any way you wanted to.
I'll actually add a little plug on our end, if you don't mind.
No.
Our website, we at CDP have a very close partnership with National VOET, and on our website, on our IRMA profile, we try to capture as many National VOET member activities as we possibly can, giving a brief overview of what they're doing. So between the National VOET site and our site, I think that, knock wood, your funder would be in good stead to start their research.
Good suggestion, too.
Thanks. So, for those of you who might be planning a disaster response funding, I will also say that the Center for Disaster Philanthropy has many additional resources and information on our website. We have our Disaster Philanthropy playbook that details strategies on how to respond. We have our Measuring the State of Disaster Philanthropy report that shows year over year how disaster grant funds move, be they bilateral, multilateral, U.S. governmental and private foundations. And we also have information on Hurricane Irma, as I just alluded to. We have also launched our own CDP Hurricane Irma Fund, Recovery Fund, So I know that you all have heard about several funds out there. Lots of good research, lots of good happening. So please take a look. But I do want to go ahead and start to close down our call. I'm just looking at the time here. And if I can have our producer switch over to the resources slide. Here's a list of resources that are available for you from the CDP website, the Miami Foundation website, our partners, the Council on Foundations, Sherry McGill's organization, the Jessie duPont Fund's website. The VOET Institute is another organization who is doing very specific recovery work around Barbuda, and as well as the Community Foundation of Sarasota, looking at Hurricane Irma relief and recovery. Take a peek at any of these sites. We certainly want you to investigate and to participate. So this is all the time that we have right now today for our webinar. I'd love to offer really special thanks to Liz, Rebecca, Bob, Sherry, and Cathy for taking the time to share their insights. Extra special thanks to the Council on Foundations and to the Southeastern Council on Foundations for co-hosting this webinar with us. And certainly special thanks to every one of you who have joined us on this call. I know that many of you had questions that weren't addressed during our call, and maybe you should feel free just to email me directly. My email address is Regine. It's regine.webster@disasterphilanthropy.org. I'd like to consider myself pre-available, so call or email me anytime. And I'll just thank you all one more time and wish you a great afternoon. Please keep your eyes on Hurricane Irma.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much. Bye-bye.